The gunshots echoed through the dusty streets of San Antonio, Texas, as Amelia Reed ran for her life, her tattered blue dress clinging to her sweat-soaked skin, and her dark hair tumbling from what had once been an elegant updo. It was 1875, and she had just escaped from the clutches of Theodore Wilks, a wealthy businessman who had purchased her from her uncle after her parents' death left her with no protection and nowhere to turn. The sun beat down mercilessly as Amelia's lungs burned with each desperate breath. Behind her, she could hear the shouts of Wilks' men as they pursued her through the growing darkness. She had managed to slip away during a moment of carelessness when they'd stopped at a saloon on their way to Wilks' ranch outside of town. The transaction had been illegal. Of course, slavery had been abolished a decade ago, but in the lawless corners of Texas, money still bought whatever a man desired, including a young woman of 21. Amelia darted between buildings, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped animal. She had no plan beyond escape, no destination beyond a way. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, and panic clawed at her throat as she realized she was running out of town, into open country where there would be nowhere to hide. "There she is!" A rough voice called out, and another shot rang out, sending splinters of wood flying from a fence post near her head. Tears blurred her vision as Amelia pushed herself harder, veering toward a cluster of buildings that appeared in the distance. As she drew closer, she realized it was a small ranch, with a weathered farmhouse and a large barn. Light glowed from the windows of the house, but the barn doors stood partially open, offering a shadow of promise. Without hesitation, Amelia sprinted for the barn, slipping inside and pressing herself against the rough wooden wall. The scent of hay and horses filled her nostrils as she tried to control her ragged breathing. Outside, she could hear the men's voices growing closer. She came this way. Fan out and search the area. Trembling with exhaustion and fear, Amelia moved deeper into the barn, looking desperately for a place to hide. The interior was dimly lit by moonlight filtering through cracks in the walls, revealing stalls housing several horses that shifted nervously at her presence. Suddenly, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Amelia tried to scream, but the sound died in her throat as she was pulled backward against a solid chest. "Don't make a sound," a low voice whispered in her ear. "There are men outside with guns." Amelia nodded slightly, and the hand slowly released her. She turned to face her captor, finding herself looking up at a tall man with broad shoulders and a grim expression. In the dim light, she could make out the sharp angles of his face and the wary concern in his eyes. "Who are you running from?" he asked quietly, glancing toward the barn doors. "Men who?" Amelia's voice broke and she swallowed hard. "Men who bought me." Something dangerous flickered in the man's expression. Without another word, he took her by the arm and led her to a ladder at the back of the barn. "Up there," he instructed, pointing to the hayloft. "Stay quiet and don't move." Amelia climbed the ladder, her limbs shaking with exhaustion, and concealed herself beneath a pile of hay. From her hiding place, she watched as the man grabbed a pitchfork and casually began working, as if that had been his purpose all along. Moments later, the barn doors creaked open wider, and the silhouettes of two men appeared. "Evening, gentlemen," the rancher said, his tone neutral. "Something I can help you with, looking for a woman," one of the men said gruffly. "Young, dark hair. Seen anyone like that? Can't say that I have," the rancher replied, continuing his work. "Been in here tending to my horses for the past hour. Why are you looking for her?" "She's a thief," the second man lied smoothly. "Stole valuables from my employer. We need to bring her to justice." The rancher leaned on his pitchfork. "That's so. Well, if I see any female thieves, I'll be sure to let the sheriff know. Town's that way." He nodded his head in the direction they had come from. The men hesitated, their eyes scanning the barn suspiciously. "Mind if we take a look around?" the first man asked, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "I do mind," the rancher replied, his casual demeanor shifting subtly. Amelia noticed that his free hand had moved to rest near a revolver on his belt. "This is private property. Unless you've got a warrant or the sheriff with you, I suggest you move along." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as the men stared each other down. Finally, the intruders backed away. "We'll be watching the roads," one of them warned. "When you see her, you'll understand why Mr. Wilks wants her back so badly." The rancher didn't respond, standing motionless until the men had disappeared into the darkness. Then he closed the barn doors firmly and slid a heavy wooden bar across them. "They're gone," he called up to the hayloft. "You can come down now." Amelia emerged from her hiding place, brushing hay from her dress and hair as she descended the ladder. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she felt suddenly self-conscious about her disheveled appearance and the impropriety of being alone with a strange man. "Thank you," she said softly, keeping a cautious distance between them. The rancher nodded, his expression softening slightly as he took in her appearance, the torn dress, the bruises on her arms, the fear still evident in her eyes. "I'm Tucker Finley," he introduced himself. "This is my ranch." "Amelia Reed," she replied, clasping her trembling hands together. Tucker looked toward the doors, his brow furrowing. "Those men. They said they were looking for a thief, but that's not true, is it?" Amelia shook her head, tears threatening to spill over. "My uncle sold me to Theodore Wilks after my parents died. I was supposed to be his." She couldn't finish the sentence, shame and fear choking her words. Tucker's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "You're safe now, Miss Reed. They won't find you here." "They'll come back," Amelia said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Wilks is a powerful man. He won't give up easily." "Then we'll have to be prepared," Tucker replied. He hesitated, then added, "There's a small room attached to the back of the barn where my ranch hand stays when we have one. It's empty now. You can sleep there tonight and we'll figure out what to do in the morning." Amelia wanted to refuse, to insist that she couldn't impose, but exhaustion and reality weighed heavily on her. She had nowhere else to go, no money, no family to turn to. "Thank you, Mr. Finley," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." Tucker shook his head. "No need for that. I couldn't turn away someone in trouble, especially not a lady." He gestured toward the small door at the back of the barn. "It's not much, but it's dry and safe." The room was indeed small, containing just a narrow bed, a washstand, and a three-legged stool, but to Amelia's weary eyes, it looked like a palace. Tucker lit a small oil lamp and placed it on the stand. "I'll bring you some clean water and something to eat," he said, pausing at the door. "Lock this behind me." After he left, Amelia turned the key in the lock and sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day crashing over her in waves. She had been so focused on escape that she hadn't had time to think about what would come next. Now, in the quiet of the small room, the reality of her situation pressed down on her like a physical weight. When Tucker returned with a tray bearing bread, cheese, and a pot of hot tea, along with a basin of warm water and a clean cloth, Amelia had composed herself as best she could. She opened the door at his soft knock, grateful for his consideration. "I brought you these as well," he said, placing a folded shirt and pair of trousers on the bed. "They'll be too big, but they're clean. Belonged to my younger brother before he moved to California." "You're very kind," Amelia said, fighting back tears at this simple act of compassion. Tucker cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Get some rest, Miss Reed. We'll talk in the morning." After he left, Amelia washed as best she could with the cloth and water, the warm liquid turning gray as it lifted the dust and grime from her skin. She changed into the offered clothing, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs, and secured the trousers with a piece of twine she found in the room. The shirt smelled of soap and sunlight, comforting in its cleanliness. She ate the simple meal gratefully, every bite a reminder that just hours ago she had believed she would never know freedom again. Then, exhaustion claiming her at last, she lay down on the narrow bed and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning came with the sounds of the farm awakening, roosters crowing, horses nickering, the distant lowing of cattle. Amelia stirred, momentarily disoriented by her surroundings until memory rushed back. She sat up, pushing her tangled hair from her face, and glanced around the small room that had been her sanctuary. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Miss Reed, are you awake?" Tucker's voice called softly. "Yes," she replied, quickly smoothing the borrowed clothes and running her fingers through her hair in a futile attempt to make herself presentable. "Just a moment." When she opened the door, Tucker was standing there with another tray, this one containing a bowl of porridge, a cup of coffee, and a small jar of honey. The morning light revealed what darkness had hidden. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with sun-bronzed skin, light brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, and eyes the color of a summer sky. "Good morning," he said, offering her the tray. "Thought you might be hungry." "Thank you," Amelia replied, accepting it gratefully. "I hope I haven't caused you too much trouble." Tucker shook his head. "No trouble. I've got chores to tend to, but after that we can talk about what to do next. Feel free to rest more if you need to." As he turned to leave, Amelia called after him, "Mr. Finley, may I help with your chores? I'm not used to being idle, and I'd like to earn my keep, even if it's just for a day." Tucker looked surprised, then nodded slowly. "If you'd like to. There's always work to be done on a ranch." He gestured to her clothes. "Those will do fine for now. I'll wait outside while you finish your breakfast." True to his word, Tucker was feeding the horses when Amelia emerged from the small room. She approached hesitantly, still wary of being discovered by Wilks' men. "I checked the surrounding area this morning," Tucker said, as if reading her thoughts. "No sign of those men, but that doesn't mean they've given up. Best to stay close to the barn and house for now." Amelia nodded, grateful for his caution. "What can I do to help?" Tucker handed her a bucket. "The chickens need feeding, and there are eggs to collect. Coops just behind the barn." For the next hour, Amelia lost herself in the simple tasks of the farm. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from her troubles, and there was something soothing about the routine of caring for animals who asked nothing of her but food and gentle hands. When she returned to the barn with a basket of eggs, she found Tucker brushing down a magnificent chestnut mare, his movements confident and gentle. He looked up as she entered, a small smile touching his lips. "You've got away with the chickens," he observed. "Usually they're ornery with strangers." "Animals can sense when you mean them no harm," Amelia replied, setting the basket down on a hay bale. "My father kept horses before." She trailed off, the memory of her parents' small farm still painful. Tucker nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You mentioned your uncle sold you. What happened to your parents?" Amelia leaned against a support beam, her gaze distant. "Influenza took them both last winter. The farm had been struggling after several bad seasons, and there were debts. My uncle Bartholomew claimed to be helping by taking me in, but he was more interested in the small inheritance my father had left me. When that was gone, he arranged to sell me to Wilks to cover his gambling debts." Tucker's expression darkened. "That's not just immoral, it's illegal. Slavery was abolished years ago. Wilks called it a marriage arrangement, Amelia said bitterly. But the way he spoke about me, the things he said he would do once we reached his ranch. She shuddered at the memory. I knew I had to escape, even if it meant risking my life. Tucker set down the brush and moved closer, his presence reassuring without being threatening. You were brave to run. Many wouldn't have had the courage. What choice did I have? Amelia asked simply. To live as someone's property is not to live at all. They worked in companionable silence for a while longer, tending to the horses and mucking out stalls. Amelia found herself watching Tucker when he wasn't looking, noting the strength in his shoulders, the gentleness of his hands with the animals, the quiet competence with which he moved through his tasks. He was unlike any man she had ever known. There was no cruelty in him, no desire to dominate or control. As midday approached, Tucker suggested they return to the house for the noon meal. Amelia hesitated at the barn door, scanning the horizon nervously. What if they come back while we're in the open? She asked. Tucker touched her elbow lightly. My nearest neighbor is 3 miles away, and the road to town is visible for a good distance. If anyone approaches, we'll have time to get you back to safety. Still, they moved quickly across the yard to the modest farmhouse. Inside, Amelia was surprised by the cleanliness and order. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace along one wall and a sturdy table with 4 chairs in the center. 2 doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms. It's not much, Tucker said, seeming almost embarrassed as he watched her take in her surroundings, but it's home. It's lovely, Amelia replied sincerely. Did you build it yourself? Tucker nodded, moving to the stove where a pot of something fragrant simmered. My father started it, but he died before it was finished. My brother Thomas and I completed it together. You mentioned he moved to California 4 years ago. Tucker stirred the pot, which Amelia could now see contained some kind of stew. Got gold fever. He writes occasionally, says he's doing well, but I think he's too proud to admit if he isn't. As they ate the simple but delicious beef stew with fresh bread, Amelia found herself studying the room more closely. There were small touches that spoke of care curtains at the windows, a bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes, a patchwork quilt draped over a rocking chair by the fire. Did your mother make the quilt? She asked, curious about the woman who had raised such a kind man. A shadow crossed Tucker's face. She did. She passed when I was 16. Thomas was just 14. I'm sorry, Amelia said softly. It must have been difficult losing her so young. Tucker nodded, his gaze distant for a moment before returning to the present. What about you, Miss Reed? What were your plans before? He gestured vaguely, not wanting to mention her ordeal directly. Amelia ran her finger along the grain of the wooden table. I wanted to be a teacher. I had even started correspondence with a women's college in Boston before my parents fell ill. After they died, my uncle made it clear that such ambitions were foolish. It's not foolish to want an education, Tucker said firmly. My mother taught both Thomas and me to read and write and cipher. She always said knowledge was the one thing that couldn't be taken from you. A comfortable silence fell between them as they finished their meal. Amelia insisted on washing the dishes, and Tucker didn't protest, instead taking the opportunity to check the surrounding area for any sign of Wilks' men. When he returned, his expression was grim. Riders on the North Road, he reported. Could be nothing, but we should be cautious. It might be best if you return to the barn room for now. Amelia's heart sank, but she nodded. The brief respite from fear had been pleasant while it lasted. Of course, I understand. As they walked back to the barn together, Tucker seemed lost in thought. Finally, he spoke. Miss Reed, I've been considering your situation. Those men will keep searching, and it won't be safe for you to travel alone." "I know," Amelia replied, the weight of her predicament heavy on her shoulders. "There's a town about 60 miles west of here, Junction Creek. It's small, but there's a school that might be in need of a teacher. My friend Aaron Lewis is the sheriff there. He's a good man, trustworthy. If we could get you there safely, he could help you start fresh." Hope flickered in Amelia's chest, but reality quickly dampened it. "How would I get there?" "I have no money for transportation, and Wilks' men are watching the roads." Tucker pushed open the barn door, checking inside before allowing her to enter. "I could take you," he said simply. "I have a wagon. We could leave tomorrow before dawn, take the back trails that only locals know." Amelia stared at him in astonishment. "You would do that for me?" "You barely know me, Mr. Finley." "Tucker," he corrected gently. "And yes, I would. I can't in good conscience leave you to fend for yourself, knowing what those men intend." Tears pricked at Amelia's eyes, and she blinked them back. "Why are you helping me like this?" Tucker's gaze met hers, steady and sincere. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because I believe every person deserves the chance to shape their own destiny." Before Amelia could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats caught their attention. Tucker's hand went to his gun as he moved to the barn door, peering through a crack. "It's Sheriff Davis from town," he said, relaxing slightly. "Stay here. I'll see what he wants." Amelia retreated to the shadows of the barn as Tucker stepped outside to meet the lawman. She couldn't make out their conversation clearly, but she could see them through a gap in the wooden slats. Tucker standing tall and confident, the older sheriff gesturing animatedly. After what seemed like an eternity, the sheriff tipped his hat and rode away. Tucker returned to the barn, his expression troubled. "What is it?" Amelia asked anxiously. "Did he know about me?" Tucker shook his head. "Not specifically, but Wilks has reported a runaway servant to the authorities. He's offering a substantial reward for your return." Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. "He's using the law against me." "The sheriff doesn't believe Wilks' story entirely," Tucker reassured her. "Davis is a decent man, but he's obligated to investigate reports. He asked if I'd seen any strangers in the area, and I told him the truth, that 2 armed men were trespassing on my property last night, claiming to be looking for a thief." "What did he say to that?" "He said he'd have a word with Wilks about sending armed men onto private land without authorization." Tucker ran a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed in thought. "This changes things. We need to leave sooner than I planned. Tonight, under cover of darkness." "Tonight?" Amelia echoed, her heart racing. "But won't that be suspicious? If the sheriff comes back, that's a risk we'll have to take," Tucker interrupted gently. "Wilks is using his influence to turn the law against you. The longer we wait, the more difficult it will be to get you safely away." As the reality of her situation sank in, Amelia felt a wave of guilt wash over her. "I've brought nothing but trouble to your door, Mr. Finn Tucker. Perhaps I should just leave on my own, find my own way to Junction Creek or somewhere else." Tucker stepped closer, his blue eyes intense. "Amelia, listen to me. You wouldn't make it 10 miles on your own, not with Wilks' men searching and a reward on your head. I'm offering to help because I want to, not out of obligation." The sincerity in his voice silenced her protests. After a moment, she nodded. "All right, tonight then." Tucker squeezed her shoulder briefly, the touch sending an unexpected warmth through her. "I'll make the preparations. Try to rest if you can. It will be a long journey." Rest proved elusive as Amelia waited in the small room, her mind racing with fears and possibilities. What if they were caught? What if Tucker was arrested for helping her? What if they made it to Junction Creek, but the school had no need for a teacher? And beneath all these practical concerns lay a more confusing emotion, a growing attachment to the kind rancher who had risked so much to help her. As dusk approached, Tucker returned with a bundle of clothing and a small canvas bag. "These were my mother's," he explained, handing her a simple blue dress and a dark woolen shawl. "They might be a bit large, but they'll be warmer than what you have, and less conspicuous than men's clothing." Amelia accepted the garments gratefully, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. I'll take good care of them. Keep them," Tucker said softly. She would have wanted them to be useful. He set the canvas bag on the bed. "There's food for the journey and a few other necessities. I've packed the wagon with supplies that will make it look like I'm taking goods to market in the next county. We'll leave after midnight when there's less chance of being seen." As he turned to go, Amelia caught his hand impulsively. "Tucker, I don't know how to thank you for all of this." He looked down at their joined hands, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You don't need to thank me, Amelia. Just promise me you'll make that fresh start count." "I promise," she whispered, reluctantly releasing his hand. The hours crawled by as Amelia changed into the blue dress, which hung slightly loose on her frame but was otherwise a decent fit. She braided her hair and tucked it under a simple bonnet that had been included with the clothing, transforming her appearance from that of a desperate fugitive to a respectable woman. At precisely midnight, Tucker knocked softly on her door. When she opened it, she found him dressed for travel, with a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. He carried a rifle in one hand and a lantern, turned low, in the other. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Amelia nodded, gathering the few belongings she now possessed. "As ready as I'll ever be." They moved silently through the barn and out to where the wagon waited, already hitched to a pair of strong draft horses. Tucker helped Amelia up onto the seat, then doused the lantern and climbed up beside her. With a soft click of his tongue, the horses moved forward, their hooves muffled by cloth Tucker had tied around them. The night was clear, a three-quarter moon providing enough light to see the trail without artificial illumination. They traveled in silence for the first hour, Tucker focusing on guiding the team along the narrow, winding path that skirted his property and led away from the main road. Only when they were well away from the ranch did he speak. "We'll follow this trail until dawn, then cut across to another path that runs parallel to the stagecoach road. It will take longer, but it's safer than risking the main routes." Amelia nodded, pulling the shawl tighter around her shoulders against the night chill. "How long will the journey take?" 3 days, if all goes well," Tucker replied, glancing at her with concern. "Are you cold? There's a blanket behind the seat." "I'm all right," Amelia assured him, though she was indeed feeling the chill. Pride kept her from admitting it, not wanting to appear any more of a burden than she already was. Tucker wasn't fooled. Reaching behind them without slowing the horses, he pulled out a thick woolen blanket and handed it to her. "No sense in freezing," he said pragmatically. "We've got a long way to go." Gratefully, Amelia wrapped the blanket around herself, immediately feeling warmer. "Tell me about Junction Creek," she requested, wanting to focus on something other than the dangers of their journey. "What kind of place is it?" Tucker's expression softened as he spoke about the small town. "It's a good community. Hard-working people, mostly ranchers and farmers. There's a general store, a small hotel, a church that doubles as the schoolhouse. Sheriff Lewis keeps the peace, and for the most part there's not much trouble." "And you think they might need a teacher?" Amelia asked hopefully. "Last I heard, the previous teacher had left to get married. That was a few months ago, so they might have found someone by now, but it's worth asking." Tucker glanced at her curiously. "What subjects do you teach?" Amelia laughed softly, the sound surprising her after so many days of fear. "All of them, I suppose. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography. I was particularly fond of literature and poetry. A woman of letters, Tucker said with a smile. My mother would have liked you. She was always trying to get Thomas and me to appreciate poetry, but I'm afraid we were more interested in horses and hunting. There's value in practical skills too, Amelia pointed out. Without them, we wouldn't be making this escape right now. Tucker nodded, his smile fading slightly. True enough. Still, I've always regretted not paying more attention to her lessons. After she died, I found her books of poetry and tried to read them, but much of it was beyond my understanding. It's never too late to learn, Amelia said gently. Tucker met her gaze briefly, something warm flickering in his eyes before he turned his attention back to the trail. Perhaps you could recommend where to start, once we've got you safely settled. The conversation flowed easily between them after that, moving from books to music to Tucker's life on the ranch. Amelia found herself relaxing despite their precarious situation, drawn to his quiet strength and unexpected depth. There was an authenticity about Tucker Finley that she had rarely encountered. He was exactly what he appeared to be, without pretense or hidden agenda. As the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, Tucker guided the wagon into a small copse of trees beside a narrow stream. We'll rest here for a few hours, he explained, setting the brake. Let the horses drink and graze a bit. We should be safe enough. This land belongs to a friend who won't mind us passing through. They shared a simple breakfast of bread, cheese, and dried apples from the provisions Tucker had packed, sitting on a fallen log near the stream. The rising sun cast a golden glow over the landscape, revealing a vast expanse of rolling hills dotted with mesquite and oak. It's beautiful, Amelia murmured, taking in the vista. I've lived in Texas all my life, but I've never really seen it like this. Tucker followed her gaze, nodding in agreement. Most people don't take the time to look. They're too busy trying to tame it, to bend it to their will. But the land has its own rhythm, its own wisdom. Better to work with it than against it. Is that your philosophy for ranching? Amelia asked, genuinely curious. For living, Tucker corrected with a small smile. My father tried to force the land to yield what he wanted. He fought against droughts and floods and lost more often than he won. I learned from his struggles that sometimes the wisest course is to adapt rather than to fight. Amelia considered this, finding wisdom in his words. I suppose I'm trying to adapt now, she reflected. To find a new path rather than fighting to reclaim what's lost. Tucker's expression grew serious. What happened to you being sold like property? That's something worth fighting against. Don't ever think you were wrong to resist that fate. I don't, Amelia assured him. But I also know that dwelling on what my uncle did, on what Wilks intended, won't help me build a new life. At some point, I have to look forward instead of back. Tucker studied her face, admiration clear in his eyes. You're a remarkable woman, Amelia Reed. The compliment brought a flush to her cheeks, and she looked away, suddenly self-conscious. I'm just doing what anyone would do in my situation. No, Tucker said firmly. Not everyone would have found the courage to run or the strength to face an uncertain future with such grace. Before Amelia could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Tucker was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, motioning for her to remain still. Get to the wagon, he whispered urgently. Hide under the canvas in the back. Heart pounding, Amelia did as instructed, crawling beneath the heavy tarp that covered their supplies. Through a small gap, she could see Tucker positioning himself behind a large oak tree, rifle ready but not raised. The hoofbeats grew louder, and then a voice called out, "Hello, the camp." Anyone there? Amelia held her breath, recognizing the voice as one of Wilks' men. Tucker stepped out from behind the tree, his posture relaxed but alert. "Morning," he called back. "Something I can help you with?" Two riders came into view, neither of them men who had come to the barn, but their manner watchful, predatory marked them as Wilks employees nonetheless. "Looking for a woman," one of them said, reining his horse to a stop a few yards from Tucker. "Pretty thing, dark hair. Might be traveling alone, might have found company." His eyes flicked to the wagon suspiciously. "Haven't seen anyone fitting that description," Tucker replied evenly. "I'm on my way to Junction Creek with goods for market." The second rider circled around, trying to get a better view of the wagon. "Mind if we take a look at your cargo?" "I do mind," Tucker said, his tone hardening. "This is private property you're trespassing on, and those are my private goods. Unless you've got a warrant or the authority of the law, you can be on your way." The first rider sneered, his hand moving to rest on the gun at his hip. "We've got authority from Theodore Wilks, and that counts for plenty in these parts." "Not on Lancaster land it doesn't," came a new voice, and all heads turned to see a man on horseback approaching from the direction of a distant farmhouse. He was older, gray-haired but robust, with a shotgun resting across his saddle. "Morning, James," Tucker called, visibly relaxing. These gentlemen were just leaving. James Lancaster rode up beside Tucker, eyeing the intruders coldly. "Wilks sending his dogs onto my property now. That man never did know his boundaries." The riders exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation now that they were outnumbered. "Just doing our job," the first one muttered. "If you see the woman, there's a reward for her return." "I'll keep that in mind," Lancaster said dryly. "Now get off my land before I decide to test how well my new shotgun carries." With sullen looks, the men turned their horses and rode away. Lancaster watched them go, then turned to Tucker with raised eyebrows. "Trouble, son," Tucker sighed, lowering his rifle. "It's a long story, James. Thank you for the timely arrival." Lancaster dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby branch. "Got time for that story over coffee? Martha's got a fresh pot brewing, and she'll skin me alive if I don't invite you up to the house." Tucker glanced toward the wagon, and Amelia knew he was considering her safety. "I appreciate the offer, but I should be on my way. Got to make Junction Creek by sunset day after tomorrow." Understanding dawned in the older man's eyes as he looked between Tucker and the wagon. "I see. Well, at least let me send you with some of Martha's biscuits, best in the county." He lowered his voice, though Amelia could still hear him. "Whoever you're helping, Tucker, I trust your judgment. Wilks is bad business, always has been." "I won't forget this, James," Tucker said sincerely, clasping the man's hand. "Nor should you," Lancaster replied with a wink. "I'll expect the full story next time you're passing through." He turned toward his house, then paused. "Take the South Creek Trail. It's longer, but Wilks' men won't know it. It'll bring you out near the Miller place. They're good people, will give you shelter for the night if needed." Once Lancaster was out of sight, Tucker hurried to the wagon. "Amelia, are you all right?" She emerged from beneath the canvas, shaking slightly but unharmed. "Yes, that was too close." Tucker helped her down, his hand steady on her waist. "James is right, we should take the South Creek Trail. It will add half a day to our journey, but it's safer. You trust him?" Amelia asked, still wary after their close call. "With my life," Tucker assured her. "James Lancaster was my father's closest friend. He and Martha have been like family since my parents passed." True to Lancaster's word, his wife soon appeared with a basket containing fresh biscuits, jars of preserves, and a flask of coffee. She asked no questions when Tucker introduced Amelia simply as a friend in need of assistance, but her kind eyes held understanding as she pressed Amelia's hand warmly. "You take care, dear," was all she said, before shooing them on their way with motherly concern. The South Creek Trail proved to be narrower and less traveled than their previous route, winding through dense groves of trees and across shallow streams. Progress was slower, but Tucker seemed more at ease now that they were on a path unlikely to be known to Wilks' men. As the day wore on, the terrain became more challenging, and Tucker had to focus intently on guiding the horses safely over the rough ground. Amelia found herself studying his profile as he worked the strong line of his jaw, the concentration in his eyes, the competent hands that handled the reins with such skill. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly, breaking the companionable silence that had fallen between them. "After you've delivered me to Junction Creek." Tucker glanced at her, seemingly surprised by the question. "Return to my ranch, I suppose. Spring calving will be starting soon, and there's always work to be done." "Alone." The word slipped out before Amelia could stop it, and she immediately felt heat rise to her cheeks. Tucker's expression softened. "I've been alone since Thomas left for California. It's not so bad. I have my animals, my books, neighbors like the Lancasters who check in now and then." "But it's not the same as family," Amelia observed quietly. "No," Tucker agreed, his gaze returning to the trail ahead. "It's not." Something in his tone made Amelia wonder if he was thinking of more than just the family he'd lost, if perhaps he sometimes dreamed of a wife, children, a home filled with voices and laughter rather than solitude. The thought stirred an unfamiliar warmth in her chest, an emotion she wasn't ready to examine too closely. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and the air held the unmistakable tension that preceded a storm. Tucker frowned as he studied the sky. "We need to find shelter before that hits," he said, urging the horses to a slightly faster pace. "There's an abandoned line shack about an hour ahead if I remember correctly. It's not much, but it will keep us dry." The first fat drops of rain were just beginning to fall when they reached the small, weathered structure tucked into the side of a hill. It was indeed modest, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with a bench, and a narrow cot along one wall, but after hours on the wagon, it seemed like a palace to Amelia. Tucker unhitched the horses and led them to a lean-to attached to the side of the shack, making sure they were securely tethered and had access to water from a rain barrel. By the time he returned, Amelia had swept the dirt floor with a branch and was attempting to start a fire in the fireplace using the meager supply of kindling left by previous occupants. "Here, let me," Tucker offered, kneeling beside her. His hands brushed against hers as he took the flint, and Amelia felt that same inexplicable warmth flow through her at the contact. Soon, a small but cheerful fire was crackling in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the shack as the storm raged outside. Thunder rolled across the sky and rain pounded on the roof, but inside, a cozy atmosphere had been created by the fire's glow and the simple meal they shared. "You think they'll keep looking for me?" Amelia asked softly as they sat side by side on the bench, watching the flames. "Wilks and his men." Tucker considered the question carefully before answering. "Men like Wilks don't give up easily when their pride is involved, but distance and time will work in your favor. Eventually, he'll find another target for his attentions." The thought brought little comfort. "So I'll always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if today is the day they find me." Tucker turned to face her, his expression earnest in the firelight. "Not always, Amelia, and not alone if I have any say in it." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "What do you mean?" Tucker ran a hand through his hair, suddenly seeming uncertain. "I've been thinking Junction Creek is a good town, but it's not so far from San Antonio that Wilks mightn't eventually hear of a new school teacher matching your description. Then, where can I go?" Amelia asked, despair threatening to overwhelm her. "How far must I run?" "That's just it," Tucker said gently. "Maybe running isn't the answer." He took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. What if you had protection, legal protection, that even Wilks couldn't challenge? Amelia frowned, not following his meaning. "Like a court order. I have no money for lawyers, Tucker, and no proof of what my uncle did." "I meant marriage," Tucker said quietly. "A husband's legal protection over his wife is one of the few things that might make Wilks back down." Amelia stared at him, stunned by the suggestion. "Are you proposing that I find someone to marry for protection?" Tucker met her gaze steadily. "I'm proposing that you consider marrying me." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. Amelia felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet, leaving her unbalanced and breathless. "Tucker, we barely know each other," she finally managed to say. "I know," he acknowledged, no trace of offense in his tone. "And I'm not suggesting we rush into anything, but I want you to consider it as a possibility. We could get to know each other better in Junction Creek. I have a friend there who could use help on his ranch. I could find work, be nearby while you teach. But your own ranch, I could lease it to the Lancaster's son. He's been looking to start his own place but doesn't have the capital to buy land outright." Tucker's expression was earnest, his eyes never leaving hers. "Amelia, I'm not asking this out of pity or some misplaced sense of chivalry. In the short time I've known you, I've come to admire your courage, your intelligence, your resilience. I believe we could build a good life together in time." Amelia's mind whirled with the implications of his offer. Marriage had always seemed like a distant possibility, something that would happen eventually, but not a priority compared to her dreams of education and teaching. After her parents' death and her uncle's betrayal, she had hardly dared to think of it at all. And yet, looking at Tucker in the warm glow of the firelight, she couldn't deny the connection that had formed between them in their short acquaintance. There was a steadiness to him, a fundamental decency that had become increasingly rare in her experience of men. "I don't know what to say," she admitted finally. Tucker smiled gently. "You don't have to say anything now. Just promise you'll think about it. We still have at least 2 more days of travel ahead of us, plenty of time for consideration." Amelia nodded, grateful for his understanding. "I promise." The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but Amelia found her thoughts returning again and again to Tucker's proposal. As the evening wore on and the storm showed no signs of abating, the question of sleeping arrangements became unavoidable. "You take the cot," Tucker said firmly when Amelia broached the subject. "I'll be fine on the floor near the fire." Amelia glanced dubiously at the hard, packed dirt floor. "That can't be comfortable." "I've slept in worse conditions," Tucker assured her with a smile. "During roundup, we often sleep under the stars with nothing but a saddle for a pillow." Despite her protests, Tucker insisted, and eventually Amelia relented, settling onto the narrow cot with the blanket from the wagon pulled around her. Tucker spread his coat on the floor near the fire and stretched out, tipping his hat over his eyes. "Good night, Amelia," he said softly. "Good night, Tucker," she replied, watching the firelight play across his features until sleep claimed her. Morning brought clear skies and the fresh, clean scent that always follows a rainstorm. Amelia awoke to find Tucker already up and moving about, rekindling the fire and preparing a simple breakfast from their provisions. "Sleep well?" he asked, handing her a cup of coffee. Amelia nodded, accepting the cup gratefully. "Better than I expected. You?" "Well enough," Tucker replied, though she noticed him rotating his shoulder as if working out stiffness. They ate quickly, eager to be on their way. The trail would be muddy after the rain, making travel slower, and they had lost time by stopping early the previous day. As they loaded the wagon, Amelia found herself watching Tucker with new eyes, considering his offer of marriage from every angle. There was no denying he was handsome, kind, and honorable qualities any woman would value in a husband. But marriage was meant to be for life, not merely a convenient arrangement for protection. Yet hadn't many successful marriages throughout history begun as practical arrangements? Her own parents had met at a church social and married just 6 weeks later, yet their love had been deep and genuine, growing stronger with each passing year. "You're quiet this morning," Tucker observed as they set off, the wagon wheels sinking slightly in the mud. "Just thinking," Amelia replied truthfully. Tucker nodded, respecting her silence as they traveled through the morning hours. The landscape gradually changed, the dense groves giving way to more open country dotted with small homesteads. They passed a few travelers on the road, mostly farmers heading to or from nearby properties, but saw no sign of Wilks' men. By midday, they had reached the Miller farm that Lancaster had mentioned. The family welcomed them warmly, insisting they stay for the noon meal before continuing their journey. Mrs. Miller, a plump, cheerful woman with graying hair, took Amelia under her wing immediately, providing her with a chance to wash up and freshen her appearance while Tucker spoke with Mr. Miller about the condition of the roads ahead. "That's a good man you've got there, Mrs. Miller commented as she helped Amelia pin her hair more securely beneath the bonnet. Known Tucker Finley since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His mama would be proud of the man he's become. "Oh, we're not," Amelia began, then stopped, unsure how to explain their relationship. "He's been very kind to help me." Mrs. Miller's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Kindness is a fine foundation for more, dear. My Harold and I started as neighbors helping each other through a difficult harvest. 30 years and 6 children later, I'd say it worked out just fine." The older woman's words stayed with Amelia as they continued their journey that afternoon. Tucker seemed more relaxed now, having received assurances from Miller that the route ahead was clear of suspicious characters. "Mr. Miller says we should reach the outskirts of Junction Creek by tomorrow afternoon if we make good time," he told her as they traveled. His son rode through there just last week and mentioned the school was still without a permanent teacher. Hope flared in Amelia's chest at this news. "That's wonderful, though I wonder why they've had such difficulty filling the position." "Nothing sinister," Tucker assured her with a smile. "Junction Creek is growing, but it's still small by most standards. Young women qualified to teach often prefer larger towns with more amenities and more eligible bachelors." Amelia found herself returning his smile. "Well, their loss is my gain, perhaps." As the day wore on, the terrain became more challenging, with the trail winding through hills that required Tucker's full attention to navigate safely. They stopped for the night in a small clearing beside a narrow stream, the open sky above them a vast canopy of stars. Without the luxury of a cabin this time, Tucker constructed a simple lean-to using canvas from the wagon and branches from nearby trees. He built a small fire, and they sat beside it, eating a supper of the last of Mrs. Miller's bread and some dried meat. "Tucker," Amelia said finally, having spent the day considering his proposal, "about what you said last night." He looked up, his expression guarded but hopeful. "Yes, I've been thinking about it all day," she continued, gathering her courage. "And I'm not saying yes, not yet. But I'm not saying no, either." Tucker's face broke into a warm smile that made her heart skip. "That's fair, more than fair. If I were to consider it, Amelia pressed on, needing to be clear, I would want us to truly know each other first. To be sure that we could build something real, not just convenient. I want that too, Tucker assured her earnestly. I wouldn't have suggested it otherwise, Amelia. I believe there's potential for something genuine between us, but I respect that these things take time. Relief washed over her at his understanding. Then perhaps, when we reach Junction Creek, we could, court properly, see if what we feel now can grow into something lasting. Tucker reached across the space between them and took her hand gently in his. I would like that very much. The touch of his calloused palm against her sent warmth spreading through Amelia's body, a pleasant sensation that had nothing to do with the fire before them. For the first time since her parents' death, she felt a glimmer of hope for a future that might include not just safety and independence, but also companionship and perhaps even love. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, hands still joined, before practical matters reasserted themselves. The sleeping arrangements were more challenging without the cabin's separate spaces, but Tucker maintained a respectful distance, creating a bed for himself on the opposite side of the fire, while Amelia took the lean-to. Morning came with a brilliant sunrise that painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. They broke their fast with the last of their provisions, then set out for the final leg of their journey to Junction Creek. The landscape grew more familiar to Tucker as they approached the town, and he pointed out landmarks to Amelia, the lightning-struck oak that marked the boundary of Davidson's cattle range, the three prominent hills locals called the Sisters, the ancient cottonwood where travelers had carved their initials for generations. It was mid-afternoon when they crested a final hill and Junction Creek came into view below them, a small but tidy settlement nestled in a valley, with a creek running along its western edge. From their vantage point, Amelia could make out perhaps 30 buildings, including a white church with a modest steeple that she assumed doubled as the schoolhouse. "It's lovely," she said softly, a curious mixture of anticipation and anxiety filling her chest. This place represented both sanctuary and uncertainty, a chance for a new beginning, but also the unknown. Tucker reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. "Ready?" Amelia took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The town grew larger as they approached, revealing details hidden from the distant view: the general store with its covered porch where a few men sat playing checkers, the small hotel with lace curtains in the windows, the blacksmith shop from which came the rhythmic clanging of hammer on anvil. People looked up as the wagon passed, curious about the newcomers but not unfriendly. Tucker returned waves and greetings, clearly familiar to many of the townsfolk from previous visits. He guided the team to a modest building with a sign reading "Sheriff" above the door, bringing the wagon to a halt before it. "I'll speak to Aaron first," he explained to Amelia. "Let him know the situation." Before he could dismount, the door opened, and a tall man with sandy hair and a neatly trimmed mustache stepped out, adjusting the badge on his vest. His face broke into a wide grin at the sight of Tucker. "Well, look what the wind blew in," he called, striding toward them. "Tucker Finley, it's been too long." "Aaron," Tucker greeted warmly, jumping down from the wagon to clasp hands with the sheriff. "Good to see you." Sheriff Lewis's gaze moved to Amelia, curiosity evident in his expression. Tucker turned, extending a hand to help her down from the wagon. "Aaron, this is Miss Amelia Reed." Amelia, Sheriff Aaron Lewis, an old friend and the man who keeps the peace in these parts. "Miss Reed," the sheriff said, tipping his hat politely. "Welcome to Junction Creek." "Thank you, Sheriff," Amelia replied, smoothing her skirts nervously. "I'm pleased to make your acquaintance." Tucker's expression grew serious. "Aaron, is there somewhere we can talk privately? Miss Reed has had some trouble that you should know about, especially if she's to stay in Junction Creek." Understanding dawned in the sheriff's eyes. "Of course." "Let's go inside. Mrs. Peterson across the street runs a small boarding house finest in town. We can get Miss Reed settled there while we talk." An hour later, Amelia found herself in a clean, comfortable room at the Peterson boarding house, while Tucker and Sheriff Lewis conferred in the sheriff's office. Mrs. Peterson, a widow with a kind face and practical manner, had shown her to the room, provided fresh water for washing, and promised a hot meal at 6 o'clock sharp. Alone for the first time in days, Amelia stood at the window overlooking the main street, watching the ordinary activities of the small town: a mother herding children toward home, a wagon delivering goods to the general store, two men deep in conversation outside the barber shop. Normal life, peaceful and uncomplicated, seemed both foreign and desperately appealing after her recent experiences. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Reed, it's Tucker." Amelia opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, hat in hand, looking more relaxed than she had seen him since their journey began. "May I come in?" he asked, glancing down the hall where Mrs. Peterson could be heard clattering pots in the kitchen. "Of course," Amelia replied, stepping aside, "though Mrs. Peterson might not approve of a gentleman caller in my room." Tucker smiled as he entered, leaving the door partly open to preserve proprieties. "Aaron's coming over shortly to speak with you. I've told him everything about your uncle, Wilks, the men pursuing you. He believes we can keep you safe here, especially with legal measures in place." "Legal measures?" Amelia questioned. "Aaron's sending a telegraph to the district judge and the authorities in San Antonio, reporting your uncle and Wilks for human trafficking. It's illegal, even if they tried to disguise it as a marriage arrangement." Tucker's expression hardened momentarily before softening again as he looked at her. "More immediately, there's good news. The school board is indeed still seeking a teacher, and Aaron sits on it. He's arranged for you to meet with them tomorrow." Joy surged through Amelia at this news. "That's wonderful. I can't thank you enough, Tucker." "There's more," he continued, a hint of nervousness entering his voice. "I spoke with John Everett. He owns the Double E Ranch just outside of town. He's looking for an experienced ranch hand, and I've worked with him before during cattle drives. He's offered me a position." Amelia's heart quickened at the implications. "So you're staying in Junction Creek?" Tucker nodded, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. "If that's all right with you. I meant what I said about courting properly, getting to know each other better. But if my presence makes you uncomfortable in any way, I'll understand." "No," Amelia said quickly, surprised by the strength of her own reaction. "I mean, yes, it's more than all right. I'd like that very much." The smile that spread across Tucker's face made him look younger, almost boyish in his happiness. "Then it's settled. I'll find lodgings in town, perhaps here at Mrs. Peterson's if she has another room available." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Lewis, who confirmed everything Tucker had told her and assured Amelia of his protection. The sheriff's wife, he mentioned, was on the school board and would be particularly pleased to meet a qualified young teacher. "Junction Creek has been growing steadily," Sheriff Lewis explained. "We've got nearly 20 children of school age now, with more coming. The last teacher left us rather suddenly when her fiancé from back east arrived to claim her." "I have no such entanglements," Amelia assured him with a smile. "And I'm very eager for the opportunity." After the sheriff departed, Mrs. Peterson called them to dinner, which was served in a cozy dining room with 3 other boarders: an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as the town's only lawyer, a middle-aged woman who worked at the general store, and a young man who served as clerk at the hotel. All welcomed Amelia warmly, curious about the newcomer but politely restraining from too many personal questions. Throughout the meal, Amelia was acutely aware of Tucker's presence beside her, the occasional brush of his arm against hers sending that now familiar warmth through her body. There was something both comforting and exhilarating about his nearness, a contradiction she was only beginning to understand. After dinner, Tucker excused himself to see to the horses and wagon, promising to return the next day to accompany her to the school board meeting. Left alone with Mrs. Peterson as they cleared the dishes, Amelia found herself the subject of the older woman's shrewd assessment. "That young man cares for you a great deal," Mrs. Peterson observed, handing Amelia a plate to dry. Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We've only known each other a short time." "Sometimes that's all it takes," the widow replied with a knowing smile. "My Henry asked me to marry him on our second meeting. We had 50 wonderful years together before the Lord called him home." "Tucker has been very kind to me," Amelia acknowledged, carefully placing the dried plate on the stack. "He helped me when I had nowhere else to turn." Mrs. Peterson nodded sagely. "Kindness in times of trouble reveals a man's true character more than pretty words in times of ease. Remember that, dear." The next morning dawned bright and clear, with a crispness to the air that hinted at the approaching autumn. Amelia dressed carefully in the blue dress Tucker had given her, which Mrs. Peterson had kindly pressed for her the night before. Her hair she arranged in a simple but neat style, wanting to appear professional yet approachable for her meeting with the school board. Tucker arrived promptly at 9, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt, his usually wind-tousled hair combed neatly. The transformation from trail-worn traveler to respectable gentleman was striking, and Amelia found herself appreciating anew the strong lines of his face and the warmth of his smile. "You look lovely," he said sincerely, as she descended the boarding-house stairs. "Thank you," Amelia replied, smoothing her skirts self-consciously. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Finley." His grin at her teasing remark lightened the moment, dispelling some of her nervousness about the upcoming meeting. They walked together to the church, where Sheriff Lewis had informed them the school board would be gathering. The interior of the small white church was simple but well-maintained, with polished wooden pews and clear glass windows that allowed sunlight to stream in. At the front, where a pulpit would stand on Sundays, a table had been arranged with 5 chairs behind it and a single chair facing them. 4 people were already seated at the table. Sheriff Lewis, an older gentleman with spectacles and a serious expression, a middle-aged woman whom the sheriff introduced as his wife, and a younger man with the weathered look of a farmer. "This is Benjamin Holcomb, our town mayor," Sheriff Lewis said, indicating the older gentleman. "And Mrs. Marion Lewis, my wife, who oversees much of the school's daily operations. And this is Caleb Wilson, who represents the farming families with children in the school." "We're still waiting for Reverend Simmons," Mrs. Lewis explained, checking the clock on the wall. "He should be here shortly." As if summoned by her words, the church door opened and a tall, thin man in clerical collar hurried in, apologizing for his tardiness. With all board members present, the interview began in earnest. Amelia sat straight-backed in the lone chair, answering questions about her education, teaching experience, which was limited to tutoring neighbors' children and assisting in her own school when teachers were absent, and her views on discipline, curriculum, and moral instruction. Throughout, she felt Tucker's supportive presence from the back pew where he sat observing quietly. "Miss Reed," Reverend Simmons said finally, "may I ask what brings you to Junction Creek? It's rather remote for a young woman traveling alone." Amelia glanced at Sheriff Lewis, who gave a slight nod, indicating that the board members had been informed of her situation in general terms. "I came seeking a fresh start," she replied honestly. "My parents passed away last year and circumstances became difficult. Mr. Finley was kind enough to help me reach Junction Creek when he heard you were in need of a teacher." Mrs. Lewis's expression softened at this. "We are indeed in need, Miss Reed. The children have been without proper instruction for nearly 2 months now." After a few more questions, the board members asked Amelia to step outside while they deliberated. Tucker joined her in the churchyard, offering silent support as they waited. "You did wonderfully," he assured her, noticing her anxious expression. "They'd be fools not to hire you." Amelia smiled gratefully. "I hope you're right. Teaching is all I've ever wanted to do." They didn't have to wait long. Within 15 minutes, Sheriff Lewis appeared at the church door, beckoning them back inside with a smile that suggested good news. "Miss Reed," Mayor Holcomb announced formally when they were seated again, "the Junction Creek School Board is pleased to offer you the position of schoolteacher for the remainder of this term, with the possibility of renewal based on satisfactory performance." Joy surged through Amelia, nearly overwhelming her. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "I accept with gratitude, and I promise to do my utmost for the children of Junction Creek." The practicalities were quickly arranged. She would be provided with living quarters in the small cottage behind the church that had been built specifically for the teacher. A modest but adequate salary would be paid monthly, and she would begin her duties the following Monday, giving her a few days to settle in and prepare. As they left the church, Tucker caught her hand and squeezed it gently. "Congratulations, Schoolmarm Reed," he said with a teasing smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. Amelia laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "It hardly seems real. Just days ago I was running for my life, and now—" She gestured around at the peaceful town square. "Now you're home," Tucker finished for her, his expression growing serious. "Or at least, I hope you'll come to think of it that way." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity as Amelia prepared to begin her teaching duties. Mrs. Lewis helped her settle into the teacher's cottage, a snug 2-room structure with a small kitchen, a bedroom, and a sitting area. The townswomen, curious about the new teacher, stopped by with gifts, curtains for the windows, a patchwork quilt for the bed, preserves and baked goods for her pantry. Tucker, true to his word, had taken the position at the Double E Ranch and found lodging in town with the blacksmith's family. He rode in each evening after his day's work, often bringing small gifts, a bouquet of wildflowers, a book he thought she might enjoy, once even a kitten he'd rescued from a hollow log, which Amelia promptly named Minerva after the Roman goddess of wisdom. Their courtship progressed with a sweetness and sincerity that Amelia had never expected to find. Tucker was unfailingly respectful, never presuming upon their growing closeness, yet there was an underlying current of attraction between them that made even the most innocent touch his hand at her elbow as they walked, their fingers brushing as they shared a book, feel charged with meaning. On the Sunday before school was to begin, the entire town gathered for church services, curious to see their new teacher in an official capacity. Amelia sat beside Mrs. Lewis in the front pew, conscious of the many eyes upon her, but bolstered by Tucker's reassuring presence several rows back. After the service, Reverend Simmons introduced her formally to the congregation, and parents brought their children forward to meet their new teacher. Amelia greeted each child by name, storing away details: Sarah's shy smile, William's confident handshake, little Emma's curious questions that would help her connect with them in the classroom. Throughout the introductions, She was aware of Tucker watching her, a warm smile playing about his lips as he observed her interactions with the children. When the crowd finally dispersed and they had a moment alone, he leaned close to murmur, "You're a natural with them. They're going to adore you." "I hope so," Amelia replied, nervousness and excitement warring within her at the prospect of her first day. "I want so much to do well by them." "You will," Tucker assured her confidently, "just as you've done well by everyone who's had the privilege of knowing you." The sincerity in his voice made her heart swell, and Amelia found herself wondering how it was possible to develop such deep feelings for someone in so short a time. Yet there was no denying the connection between them, growing stronger with each passing day. Monday morning arrived clear and bright, and Amelia stood at the door of the schoolhouse, bell in hand, heart pounding with anticipation as children began arriving with their parents. By 8 o'clock, 18 students ranging in age from 6 to 16 were seated at the simple wooden desks, gazing at her with expressions varying from curiosity to skepticism to open friendliness. "Good morning, children," Amelia began, her initial nervousness fading as she looked at their expectant faces. "I am Miss Reed, and I am honored to be your teacher." The day passed in a blur of introductions, assessments of each child's educational level, establishing rules and routines and beginning their first lessons. By the time the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Amelia was exhausted but exhilarated, certain that she had found her true calling. She was still at her desk, reviewing her notes on each student when a knock at the schoolhouse door announced Tucker's arrival. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, a bunch of late blooming wildflowers in the other. "How was your first day, Miss Reed?" he asked with a smile that never failed to warm her from within. "Challenging," Amelia admitted, accepting the flowers with a grateful smile. "But wonderful. These children are eager to learn, Tucker. Even the older boys who tried to test me at first seemed genuinely engaged by the end." "I'm not surprised," Tucker said, leaning against the doorframe. "You have a way of drawing people in, making them want to be better than they are." The compliment brought color to Amelia's cheeks. "You give me too much credit." "Not nearly enough," Tucker countered softly. He straightened, gesturing outside. "I thought you might like to celebrate your first day with dinner at the hotel restaurant. Mrs. Peterson gave her blessing for you to miss the boarding house meal tonight." Amelia hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that very much. Let me put these lovely flowers in water first, and gather my things." The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Junction Creek, which wasn't saying a great deal by big city standards, but represented luxury in the small frontier town. The tables were covered with real linen cloths, the silverware gleamed in the lamplight, and the menu offered choices beyond the basic fare available elsewhere. As they dined, Tucker told her about his day at the Double E Ranch, where he was quickly proving his worth to John Everett. In turn, Amelia shared amusing anecdotes about her first day with the students, including young William's earnest explanation of why spelling wasn't nearly as important as knowing how to lasso a calf. "He has a point," Tucker laughed, his eyes crinkling in that way that Amelia had come to find endearing. "Though I suspect you convinced him otherwise." "I suggested that a man who can both spell correctly and lasso a calf has an advantage over one who can only do the latter," Amelia replied with a smile. That seemed to satisfy him for now. As their meal concluded, Tucker grew more serious, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Amelia, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. Sheriff Lewis received a reply to his telegraph about Wilks and your uncle." Amelia's heartbeat quickened with anxiety. "What did it say?" "The authorities in San Antonio have opened an investigation." Several other young women have come forward with similar stories about Wilks attempting to purchase them. Your uncle has apparently left town, but they're looking for him as well. Relief washed over Amelia at this news. So Wilks is being held accountable. It appears so, Tucker confirmed. It may take time for the legal process to unfold, but Aaron believes the evidence is strong enough that Wilks will face serious consequences. Tears pricked at Amelia's eyes, not of sorrow, but of vindication and release. I never thought I'd see justice done. I was just trying to survive. Tucker squeezed her hand gently. You did more than survive, Amelia. You've thrived. Look at what you've accomplished in just these few days. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Amelia threw herself into teaching, finding joy in the progress of her students and the respect of their parents. Tucker divided his time between work at the Double E and courting Amelia, properly Sunday walks after church, Wednesday evening dinners at the hotel, occasional Saturday outings to neighboring farms or natural landmarks he thought she would enjoy. As autumn deepened toward winter, their feelings for each other grew more profound. What had begun as admiration and attraction was blossoming into something deeper, more complex, a love built on shared values, mutual respect, and genuine enjoyment of each other's company. It was on a crisp November evening, as they walked back to her cottage after a community harvest celebration, that Tucker finally gave voice to what had been evident to everyone in Junction Creek for weeks. "Amelia," he said, stopping beneath the sprawling oak tree that stood near her cottage, "I know we agreed to take our time to court properly and be certain of our feelings before making any decisions." Her heart quickening, Amelia nodded. "Yes, we did." Tucker took both her hands in his expression earnest in the moonlight filtering through the oak's branches. "I find that I am certain, more certain than I've ever been of anything in my life. I love you, Amelia Reed. I love your kindness, your courage, your intelligence. I love the way you care for your students, the way you can find humor even in difficult situations, the way you make me want to be a better man just by being who you are." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy. "Oh, Tucker." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet pouch. From it, he produced a ring, a delicate gold band with a small pearl nestled in the center. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "My father gave it to her when they became engaged. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right woman to wear it." Dropping to one knee before her, Tucker held up the ring, his blue eyes shining with love and hope in the moonlight. "Amelia Reed, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Not for protection or convenience, but because I love you with all my heart and want to build a life with you." "Yes," Amelia whispered, tears flowing freely now. "Yes, Tucker Finley, I will marry you. I love you too, so much more than I ever thought possible." His face breaking into a radiant smile, Tucker slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and drew her into his arms. Their first kiss was sweet and tender, a promise of the life they would share together. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Junction Creek, met with universal approval and delight. Sheriff Lewis offered to give the bride away. Mrs. Peterson insisted on hosting the wedding breakfast, and Reverend Simmons suggested the first Sunday in December as a suitable date for the ceremony. "What about your ranch?" Amelia asked Tucker as they discussed their future plans. "You love that land. I don't want you to give it up for me." Tucker smiled, pulling her close as they sat on the porch swing of her cottage. "I've been thinking about that. The lease to Lancaster's son ends in the spring. What would you say to moving there after the school term ends? Junction Creek has been good to us, but that land is part of my heritage, something I'd like to pass on to our children someday." The casual mention of children sent a warm glow through Amelia. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. "I've grown fond of Junction Creek, but the idea of making a home with you on your family's land feels right somehow." "And the teaching?" Tucker asked, his expression serious. "I know how much it means to you." Amelia considered this. "There's a growing settlement not far from your ranch, isn't there? Perhaps they need a teacher, or will as more families arrive. And even if not immediately, there will always be children to teach our neighbors. Education doesn't only happen in schoolhouses." Tucker's arms tightened around her, his lips brushing her temple. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "You have," Amelia laughed, turning her face up to his. "But I don't mind hearing it again." Their wedding day dawned clear and cold, the December air crisp with the promise of winter. The small church was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for the Christmas season, lending a festive air to the proceedings. Every resident of Junction Creek seemed to be in attendance, the community having embraced Amelia as one of their own in the months since her arrival. Amelia wore a simple dress of ivory satin that Mrs. Lewis and several other women had helped her make, with her mother's lace veil that she had managed to keep through all her travails. As Sheriff Lewis walked her down the aisle to where Tucker waited, handsome in a new suit, his face alight with love and pride, Amelia felt her heart overflow with gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Simmons began, his voice filling the hushed church, "we are gathered here in the sight of God and this company to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, with Tucker and Amelia exchanging vows in clear, steady voices that reflected the certainty of their commitment. When Tucker placed a second ring, a simple gold band to complement her engagement ring on her finger, Amelia felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Simmons declared with a broad smile. "Mr. Finley, you may kiss your bride." Tucker needed no further encouragement, drawing Amelia into a kiss that was both tender and filled with promise, to the cheers and applause of their friends and neighbors. The celebration that followed at the hotel was joyous, with music and dancing and more food than the small town had seen at one gathering in years. As evening approached, the newlyweds slipped away to the small house that Tucker had rented for their first few months of marriage, a cozy dwelling not far from the schoolhouse, where Amelia would continue teaching until spring. Later, as they lay in each other's arms in the quiet darkness of their new home, Amelia reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her from terror to joy in the space of just a few months. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Finley?" Tucker asked softly, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. The new name sent a thrill through Amelia. "About how close I came to missing all of this," she replied honestly. "If I hadn't found the courage to run that night, if you hadn't been in your barn when I needed shelter." Tucker pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Perhaps it wasn't just chance. My mother always said God works in mysterious ways." "Then I'm grateful for the mystery," Amelia murmured, nestling against her husband's strong chest. "And for you, Tucker Finley, with all my heart." Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers and new growth, and with it came the end of the school term, and the time for Tucker and Amelia to bid farewell to Junction Creek. The decision to return to Tucker's ranch had been confirmed when news arrived that Theodore Wilks had been convicted of multiple crimes and sentenced to prison, while Amelia's uncle had fled to Mexico to escape prosecution. With the threat removed, they were free to build their life wherever they chose. The entire town turned out to see them off, the children from Amelia's class presenting her with a handmade quilt. each square stitched by a different student as a remembrance of her time as their teacher. "You'll come back and visit," Sheriff Lewis said gruffly as he shook Tucker's hand and embraced Amelia. "That's not a request, it's an order from the law." "We will," Amelia promised, tears in her eyes as she hugged Mrs. Lewis and the other women who had become dear friends. "And you must all come see us when you're in our area." With final waves and calls of goodbye, Tucker clicked to the horses, and the wagon rolled out of Junction Creek, heading toward their home, where they would build their future together. The journey back to Tucker's ranch was far different from their flight to Junction Creek. Relaxed, joyful, full of plans and dreams for the years ahead. When they finally crested the rise that overlooked the Finley property, Amelia gasped at the beauty of it: the rolling pastures, the creek winding through stands of oak and mesquite, the sturdy farmhouse and barn nestled against a backdrop of distant hills. "Welcome home, Amelia," Tucker said softly, his arm around her waist as they paused to take in the view. "It's beautiful," she whispered, leaning into his embrace. "Everything I could have hoped for." As they approached the house, Amelia noticed changes: fresh paint on the porch, new curtains at the windows, flowers planted along the walkway. At her questioning glance, Tucker grinned. "The Lancasters helped get things ready for us," he explained. Martha insisted that a new bride deserved a home that was properly prepared, as she put it. Inside, the house had been thoroughly cleaned and updated, with new furnishings joining Tucker's original pieces in a harmonious blend that immediately felt like home to Amelia. A note on the kitchen table informed them that the pantry had been stocked, the chickens fed, and the neighbors would stop by the next day to welcome them properly. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Amelia felt a profound sense of peace and rightness settle over her. She had fled to this very spot in desperate fear for her life, only to find not just safety but love, purpose, and a future brighter than she had dared to dream. "What are you smiling about?" Tucker asked, his hand warm around hers. Amelia leaned against his shoulder, contentment filling her heart. "I was just thinking about the night we met, how terrified I was, running blindly with no idea what lay ahead." Tucker nodded, his expression growing serious. "I'll never forget seeing you in the barn, looking so frightened yet so determined. Even then, something in me knew you were special." "You saved my life that night," Amelia said softly. "Not just by hiding me from those men, but by giving me hope when I had none." "And you saved mine," Tucker replied, turning to face her fully. "I didn't realize how lonely I was until you came into my life. How much I needed someone to share this place with, to make it truly a home." As the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight, Tucker drew her into his arms for a tender kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, a future built on love, respect, and the unshakable bond that had formed between them from that first desperate night in the barn. "You're safe now," he had told her then, and it had been true in ways neither of them could have imagined. Safe to love, safe to dream, safe to build a life filled with purpose and joy. And for Amelia Finley, formerly Reed, who had once run for her very survival, that safety was the greatest gift of all. 5 years later, the Finley ranch had flourished under Tucker and Amelia's joint care. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, first with the arrival of their son James, now 4 years old and already showing his father's affinity for horses, and then their daughter Elizabeth, just turning 2, with her mother's dark hair and quick smile. The nearby settlement had indeed grown into a proper town, and Amelia divided her time between caring for their children and teaching at the new schoolhouse 3 days a week. Tucker had become one of the most respected ranchers in the county. known for his fair dealings and progressive farming methods. On the anniversary of their first meeting, a date they always commemorated, Tucker took Amelia to the barn where she had first sought refuge. It had been rebuilt and expanded over the years, but the original structure still stood, a testament to the beginning of their journey together. You ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't run into this barn that night? Tucker asked, his arm around her waist as they stood in the spot where they had first laid eyes on each other. Sometimes, Amelia admitted, watching through the open doors as James chased a butterfly in the yard, Elizabeth toddling after him with determined steps. But then I look at our children, at the life we've built together, and I know that this is exactly where I was meant to be. Tucker turned to her, love shining in his eyes as he had every day since they had met. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Amelia Finley. You and our children are my whole world. And you are ours, Amelia replied softly, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. My brave, kind cowboy who once said you're safe now and made it true for the rest of our lives. As they walked hand in hand back to the house, their children running to meet them with laughter and outstretched arms, Amelia knew with absolute certainty that the terrified young woman who had fled into this barn 5 years ago could never have imagined the happiness that awaited her. From desperate escape to boundless joy, it had been a journey worth every step, leading to a love that would last a lifetime.